Welcome to Matt's Automotive Channel. In this video, we're going to get this motor with the long tubes back into this 98 Mustang Cobra. In the last video, we would have had it in except for one thing. Those long tubes. They make things way more difficult. And we also ran into a bunch of other problems as well, and the video ended up just getting to be too long. So anyway, the way we're going to attack it this time is to get this motor in. We're first going to take the transmission out and the K-member and assemble it all outside the car, and then actually bring it up from the bottom and put it in that way. It really seems to be the only decent way to do it with long tubes. At this point, it should be fairly easy to get this transmission out of here. And the last video we did remove the drive shaft, so that's completely out. And really the only thing holding this transmission in at the point is this rear cross member here holding the back of the transmission in. And of course the motor's out, so it's not bolted to it. So the only thing holding in the front are those two ropes there that I have tied up there to the firewall. So all we really need to do is get the transmission jack out, support the transmission, take those rear cross member bolts off and the ropes, and then lower it down. So let's get started. All right, so let's take off this shifter assembly. And then pull off the bezel. Oh, interesting. I wonder what that is. Anyway, disconnect the 12 volt. I apologize, I lost a little bit of video footage, but this is a pretty easy thing anyway. You just undo the 4 bolts that hold the that bezel in place right there, and then pull it off, and then a couple bolts there for the shifter handle. So anyway, pretty simple. So anyway, this is all disconnected now. All right, now that we have the transmission jack in place, let's go ahead and sling over our safety chain. Okay, the rear end of the transmission is unbolted. So let's just take care of these 2 ropes, and then we can lower it down. I almost forgot our little retainer clip here for the clutch cable. Just pull this guy off. There we go. And we can slide this out. A little stubborn. There we go. Now we can go ahead and lower it. Okay, I believe we have everything disconnected now, so hopefully we can just lower this thing straight out. Just lower here. Looks like it's coming straight out. This cart does not work that well anymore. I used to pull this handle up and it used to go down, and I kind of have to pump it. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but regardless, we got the transmission out. Okay, take the harness down. Okay, here she comes. And there we go. Easy peasy. It appears as if those little critters, most likely mice, that got all the debris into the motor that we had to clean out, have also been around the transmission. There's some seeds there, some up there. Hopefully they didn't eat up any of this wiring harness. Looks like that's been zip tied before. There's probably a little retainer there that broke off, kind of like this one here. And so they zip tied it. But we'll have to kind of inspect this wiring harness and make sure nothing's been gnawed through. Well, with both the motor and the transmission out, it's looking pretty bare up here. And of course. All right, that wasn't too bad. So next is the K-member. So what do we have to do to get the K-member out? Well, we're gonna start by taking off the wheels and the brakes. Wow, you can certainly tell this car has not been driven for quite some time. I believe it was 2014. To get the brakes off, I just hit these with some penetrating fluid, and it's just two 15mm bolts, one here and one up there. All right, with the bolts out, if you just gotta take the caliper off, and it's never a good idea to hang it from the hose here, as you can damage it. So we're gonna get a little hook here and hang it here from the strut. Okay, it looks like the rotor has kind of rusted itself to the spindle here, so I'm going to hit it with the hammer here with the rubber tip, so hopefully not breaking it. Just so this doesn't come flying off when I break it loose, I'm going to put one nut on here. Okay, this baby's really on here, so let's hit it with some WD. Hopefully it'll soak in here and loosen up some of this rust. There we go. Now just the same thing on the other side. Okay, now we have both rotors off. Let's just spin the hub and see what they sound like. This one's quiet, but it does spin very easy. This is on the passenger side. On the driver's side, very noisy. This bearing is shot. So we will have to replace this wheel bearing. Now let's remove the steering shaft. This is a 13mm bolt. There we go. Now I was thinking about just leaving the steering rack on and dropping the whole system, the power steering system, but I remember that this has a hydro boost brake system, which means it uses the power steering pump to provide the brake assist. So there's lines going to that, and I don't really want to mess with it. So if you had a vacuum brake booster, you could do this fairly easy. But I think in this case, it's just going to be easier to remove the rack from the K-member. So let's get that done. So the easiest way to do this is just to remove the steering rack using these two bolts. And then we'll go ahead and tie it off to the roll bar here. And of course, we'll have to take the end links off for the roll bar as well. We'll also need to remove the outer tie rods from the spindle here. And then we'll also take the shocks off from there. And then I think it should be pretty much ready, free to drop, other than the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 8 bolts that we need to pull for the K-member. There's 2 here on this side. And then if you go back just a little bit, there's 2 more right there. And the exact same thing on the other side. Okay, let's get these end links from the outer tie rod off. Use an impact for that. Looks like we're gonna have to hold the top. Let's give this another shot. This is a 24mm, by the way. There we go. No problem. There we go. All right, looking at these joints at the end of the outer tie rod here, this one moves with a fair amount of resistance. However, the one on the driver's side is very, very loose. So it's on its way out and will need to be replaced. Also, these ball joints here don't look so great. Looks like the boots have ripped open. I'm sure there's dirt and grime in there, so those will probably likely need to be replaced as well. Now we can take off the front bolts that hold the steering rack on. The front side of these bolts are a 15mm, and the back side there is an 18mm. Actually, I'm just gonna use an impact. It's just much quicker. There we go. And we can pull the bolts out. And this has off-centered bushings here, and it looks like they're a solid bushing. I think normally that that is either a rubber bushing, or a lot of upgraded ones are like a polyurethane, but that's a solid. That's going to transfer a lot of noise. But they make them off-center so you can adjust the rack up or down. So if you lower the car, you can adjust it and get everything back into the proper alignment. Now, before I pull this completely off, I put a zip tie up here to hold it to the sway bar, the anti-roll bar here. And if you look, before I take this off, you'll see that there's two shims on the back side of this bushing here, and like a little spacer here. So I guess with this type of K-member, they have to space it out forward a little bit more, and that's the purpose. You can see the ones that came off on this side, and of course there's two shims there. Okay, let's pull this out the rest of the way. And there go the shims. And as you can see, this is now holding it to the roll bar. So, let me take these out. And let's put the bushings and bolts and washers and everything back there just so we don't lose them. Upon a little bit closer inspection, I think I'm going to take a slightly different approach than what I originally was planning, which was to take these struts off, or the shocks off here, and then the sway bar, these end links. Instead, I think I'm rather just going to take off the two bolts here on the A-arm, this lower control arm here, and I think all this can just stay in this position. Wow, look at that, that bushing's gone too. Anyway, I think that'd be a little simpler, so I think I'm going to take that approach, because the K-member is not connected to this suspension any other place. It's just basically that lower control arm there. So I'm going to go that route, and we'll see if that works. Let's go ahead and get the speed sensor off now, and it's just one bolt that secures it back here. And you can see it's an E-Torx, similar to that. That's what you'll need to get it off. Okay, usually you can just kind of push in on the other side and then push her on through. There we go. Okay, I just went ahead and pulled off the sway bar links to the lower control arm here. I use a 9/16 socket for the top and bottom. I think that might be equivalent to a 14 mm, I'm not sure. But anyway, the 9/16 works just fine. Pull it off on both sides, and then just swing it up and out of the way. Now all we have left to do before dropping the K-member is to disconnect the struts from the spindle here. These bolts are a 24 mm. Let's swing that out of the way. There we go. As you can see here, this just wobbles around loosely. I don't think there's any play in it yet, but it's on its way out. And without the rubber boot there sealing it, dirt and grime's going to get in there and start eating away the ball joint. So it's time to replace that. Now we just need to do the same to the other side. Just disconnected the strut here on the driver's side, and it looks like the ball joint's pretty much in the same condition. So we'll be replacing both of those. Now, with everything disconnected, we can go ahead and support the K-member and then start loosening the bolts and drop it down. Since there's no weight on this K-member and it's fairly light, I think we can take off these rear bolts without supporting the K-member. We still got two big beefy ones in the front holding it in place. So let's get these out. Now the driver's side. Okay, 4 more bolts to go. Okay, so I've got the transmission off the transmission jack. And so, let's go ahead and support the bottom part of the K-member. I think it's a real heavy since it's tubular and there's nothing really on it. But I don't want it to come crashing down and falling either. So, we'll support it here with this transmission gap. And now we can loosen the bolts on the side and lower it down. Actually, let's go ahead and put this safety pin around it, just in case it decides to slide off somehow. I just took out the 2 bolts on the driver's side. Now let's pull them on the passenger side. Out. And out. There we go. Yeah, I'm hoping this isn't going to roll over and fall as I lower it. But I guess I just stand clear. That's kind of what I was afraid of. Now let's go ahead and lower the trans jack. Finally, we have everything out now. So at this point, we can actually start putting things back together, rebuilding this, and hopefully get it back in there, and hopefully it's gonna run. So, yeah, not much left up there. Everything's pretty much gone. So we'll just assemble this as one piece and then raise it back up. So let's go ahead and get this all straightened out and cleaned up, and then we'll start reassembling. So really, all of this extra work just because long tubes. Well, it looks like with a 2x4 here in the front, it kind of keeps this thing from rolling over on itself. So it'll stay in the upright position as we lower the motor onto it. And I kind of lied about as far as taking everything off. This, I think, is going to have to go. The mount here for the sway bar, it's going to just be in the way when we push the motor back up in there. And right now I have the steering rack tied to it, so I'm gonna have to move it further forward up here somewhere. Probably tie it off to one of these brackets and then just remove this and get all of that out of the way. All right, now that we have the steering rack tied up to the front here, it's kind of out of the way. So now what we need to do is pull the bolt here for the sway bar and get it out of the way. Got the sway bar out of the way, super easy, just 4 bolts. Just a couple there, and then 2 on the other side. We may as well replace these ball joints now while the K-member's off. It's just easier access at this point. I'll just hit it with a little bit of heat here first. That usually works. There we go. All right, she's free. Okay, the next thing to do is to get the flywheel and clutch on to the motor. Of course, I'm gonna have to take off the motor stand to do that. So I think what I'm gonna do is transfer the motor from the motor stand over to the K-member, which I have on this hydraulic cart, and then go ahead and try to install the clutch. I think that'd be a little easier than having it just suspended from the crane there, so it won't be wiggling and wobbling around while I'm trying to torque things down. So let's give that a shot and see if it works. All right, I just went ahead and disconnected the handle from the cart here so it doesn't interfere with the engine. And now, hopefully we can just kind of lift this up until those motor mounts fit right into the cradle. Pretty darn close there. There we go. You know, it's kind of interesting here. Let me show you what I'm running into. Yeah, as I'm lowering this down, you can see that the oil filter is actually hitting the K-member here, before the motor mount falls into the K-member there. So I may end up having to take this off just to set the motor into the cradle. You know what, guys, what I'm realizing here is, remember that oil relocation device that was hooked to this? I think this is the reason why. You can see it's the oil filter is hitting right here. And if we look under here, you can see that the motor mount's just about ready to come through there, but it hits this the K-member here. Kind of a bad design. So it may be that I end up reinstalling that other device here to relocate the oil filter. I think that's what was going on. You know, if that's the case, I'm really glad I'm assembling this outside the vehicle. If I was trying to maneuver this in under the hood, this would have been a little more difficult to discover. This here is the device that I was just referring to. This was mounted up near the front of the car, which gave us a little easier access. And I wasn't sure why they had done this. Originally, I thought it was for cooling. I thought these hoses were going to go from this housing here to some kind of radiator, but it just went to a filter. And I thought, oh, well, it's probably to make it run a little cooler, because I know that at one point this engine was pretty high performance and was boosted. But it doesn't look like that's the case. It looks like this is really part of a kit that probably comes with this kind of K-member here, just simply because of that interference. So when we put this back together, this basically takes the spot of the oil filter, which is going to go right here, and then relocate the oil filter to the front of the car. That's probably what this whole thing was about. So just for kicks, let's go ahead and remove this filter and then set the engine onto the K-member and then see if we can screw that filter on. If I cannot, that's definitely the whole purpose of this relocation device. Awesome. Okay, we got it. Let's see if we can screw that filter on here. And I'm guessing it's gonna be a problem. Exactly. You can see that there's just no way this filter is gonna fit on here. It just hits the K-member. Oh, what a poor design. Well, I came so close to throwing this out, and I've always regretted throwing out stuff before I had the project done in the past, so I kept it. And good thing I did. Looks like we're gonna need it. All right, just to let you know, I was a little skeptical of using this hydraulic cart. This is one of those Harbor Freight specials. It's only a 500-pound capacity, and I know I'm gonna be maxing that out once I have the transmission, flywheel, clutch, all that stuff on here. So I'm going to leave it in this lowest setting pretty much all the time. As you can see here, it does tend to wobble back and forth a lot, so I'm going to leave it real low in case it does fall off. The other thing is, without the flywheel and clutch on there, it's a little bit nose heavy. And if I just put a little bit of pressure here, it moves forward. Just to give you a little better idea, I think I'm going to leave the crane hooked up to this just in case it starts to topple over or something when I'm messing with it and torquing things down for the clutch and flywheel. But let me show you again here. It's doesn't take much to tip it over forward, so I'm gonna have to work with caution here. It probably will help a bit with stability if I get the motor mount nuts on, so I'm gonna go ahead and bolt that up right now. And real easy access when it's off the car here. So, and it looks like we got a straight shot on there, so we'll easily be able to torque these to spec with a torque wrench. Okay, just to show you folks, this piece fits on very easy, gives you plenty of room. So we'll just go ahead and thread this on for right now. And we'll orient it downward to prevent anything from getting in there. Very interesting. You know, that's still even pretty tight. Look at that, there's not a whole lot of clearance there still. Well, I'm sure all of you folks that have ever put one of these on knew what this was immediately when I was tearing this down, saying it was probably an oil cooler. I always thought that the tubular K member gave you more space and more room to do things, but obviously not when it comes to the oil filter. The torque spec on these motor mount nuts is 111 pound-feet. Okay, let's get our new pilot bearing in. I used some Scotch-Brite and kind of went around here and got as much rust off as possible. And got a little bit of grease here on the outside of the pilot bearing. And we'll just go ahead and tap it in. When you tap it in, you want to make sure that you use something that's going to just push on the outer portion of the race. You don't want to push in on the center, otherwise you'll push it right out. So just push on the outer, and let's just tap her in. And with the bottom out, you can hear the tone change. And there we go, it's in. Just got the flywheel out of the package, and you can see it's coated with oil. That'll all need to be wiped off. All right. Now, I believe there's only one way that these will go on. The spacing between the bolt holes are not equal. They're not symmetrical. So you just have to turn this around until it fits. Now for these flywheel bolts, put on a little bit of thread locker. These bolts will get torqued down to 63 pound-feet in a star-like pattern. The best way I found to hold this in place while torquing these down to spec is just to put a bolt in the flywheel, and then one here where the bell housing is. Span a wrench between the two, and that'll lock the flywheel in place while you torque these down. Well, unfortunately, this clutch kit did not come with pressure plate bolts. So I came over to my parts bin that I was given along with this car full of random bolts, and I was able to find 5 of the 6 pressure plate bolts, but I'm missing one. So I'm going to either have to order some, or hopefully one of the auto parts stores will have these in stock. So anyway, on hold again. Just picked up some new pressure plate bolts at O'Reilly's, and these were $18. There's the part number if you're interested. And the thread for these are 3/8 by 16 by 1 inch. Grade 8 bolt. Okay, before installing the clutch, let's make sure we got all the oil off this flywheel. Look at all that. Now let's do the same with the pressure plate. Sometimes these clutch plates will tell you which side goes to the flywheel and which side goes to the pressure plate. This one does not. However, if you look at the side of this, the protrusion there always fits in here, and the flat side always goes against the flywheel. So we use our alignment tool here, put it in, and then the alignment tool goes right there into the pilot bearing, and that'll hold it in place while we put the pressure plate on. All right, let's mount up our pressure plate. All right, at this point, we're not going to go to town on this. We just want to get it so the pressure plate is holding the clutch up against the flywheel. And then while doing that, make sure that this is perfectly centered. Now, as you tighten these, make sure you go in a star-like pattern here. And you don't want to go to town on any one of these at any one time. And you'll also notice, let me show you here, that see those fingers, how they're kind of protruding beyond the edge of the pressure plate here. As this gets bolted in, these fingers will retract and go inward like so. And so it's real important that we do this evenly and very slowly, so everything stays, so the pressure stays pretty even. So I'm just going to basically go a little bit on one, then go to the opposite and turn it. These will start going, these little fingers will start going in, and you'll notice that when you come back to this bolt, it'll be loose because these other ones will have relieved some of the tension. So we're not going to do our final torque until we get these fingers fully retracted, and then periodically check, make sure that your alignment tool goes in perfectly straight. I mean, once the pressure plate's pushing against it, it holds the clutch in there. But a good idea just to check it periodically anyway, because if you bolt this down unevenly, you can kind of get it warped and sideways. So anyway, just go real slow and just a little bit on each one. These pressure plate bolts will get torqued down to 24 pound-feet. And you'll also notice that the fingers have kind of retracted there. They're pretty much flush with the outer portion of the pressure plate. Okay, we got them down as much as we can, hand tight. So let's go ahead and do the final torque on these. Okay, once I got them all, I like to just go back around and make sure that none of the others have loosened up. See, that one loosened up a little bit. That one did. Okay, now I should be able to go all the way around and have them not tighten anymore. Okay, and then one last thing, put your alignment tool in, make sure it slides in and out easily, and then it's going all the way into the pilot bearing. If this lines up, getting the transmission in will go a hell of a lot easier. Okay, now that the clutch is on, the next step prior to mating up the transmission is to get this dust plate installed. So we can kind of wiggle it up here behind the flywheel. At this point, I have the engine back onto the hoist, and I move the transmission over to the hydraulic cart. But before we can put these together, I got to get the clutch fork in there, the throat bearing, and also the new pivot ball. So let's get this installed. For installing the new pivot ball, let's put a little bit of thread locker on here. And then let's clean up the shaft and grease it up. Okay, so let's get the innards of this all cleaned up. Okay, now that we've got everything cleaned up, all the points that have friction where parts move, we definitely want to lube up. Here's where the pilot bearing goes, and the throat bearing over here. And they also want to grease up the splines a little bit. Now we don't want to go too excessive on this, because if any of this gets spun off, it could go into the clutch, and that would not be good. So basically, it's a very thin coating all over these surfaces. Just spread very thin. Also, be sure to use a high heat grease. Reason being, if you don't, the grease has a tendency to get very viscous as it heats up, and then could spin off easier. And not only do you lose the grease, it could spin off and get under the clutch and that sort of thing. So definitely use a high heat grease here. Now, here's the throwout bearing. Put a little bit of grease in here. And I just want to make sure that it slides back and forth freely on here with no catches. That feels really good. Again, we're going to want a little bit of grease here where the pivot ball is. And also here on these springs, you can see where it's rubbed before. So I'll get a little bit of grease there. And then smear it around so it's nice and thin. Okay, now let's install the throwout bearing, like so. And there we go. And it moves nice and freely. Now I think we're ready to mate the transmission with the motor. Well, before putting this together, I want to make sure I had all the bell housing bolts that I need. There are two of them that are longer and two really short ones. And the longer ones go where the alignment dowels go, and they just go in a little bit further into the block. The other ones are all the same length, with the exception of the two bottom ones here, which basically hold on this dust cover down here. Right there, you can see those two holes. And so I think we have everything that we need. Before we mate this thing together, we want to make sure that the surface here is nice and clean. So I'll remove these bolts, and then we'll scrub this really good, make sure it's clean. And I already did clean, of course, the block, and then also this dust cover here. So that's all nice and clean. So really, just cleaning this up is all we need, and then we can put them together. Oh, I just want to show you how tight this really is. Even with the engine transmission out of the car, it's still really tight. You can see that this bell housing likes to hit the headers. That's on the passenger side. Over here on the driver's side, still kind of hitting. I'm wondering if I'm gonna have to loosen these headers and move them out of the way temporarily. This is crazy. Oh, I gotta show you this. I've been finagling with this for a little while. And I was able to kind of wedge this right side in where the starter goes in behind the headers. And then kind of raise the driver's side of the motor to where the headers kind of clear this little protrusion here. And you can see I'm still not quite there yet. It's very, very close, but that input shaft is hitting the springs. So hopefully a little more finagling, I can get it in. If not, I'm obviously gonna have to loosen these headers to get it in. All right, guys, I didn't get most of this recorded, but I'll tell you what I ended up having to do. I really struggled with this. And even with the engine out of the car and the transmission out of the car, it's still very difficult to mate these together when you have long tubes. As you can see, I ended up having to unbolt headers to make clearance to get this thing lined up. It just would not line up with these long tubes in here. As you can see where the starter goes, this little cutout here, this little protrusion got in the way and was hitting the headers. So by loosening these up, it was just enough to get it in there and aligned. So learn from my mistakes, guys. If you're doing this, go ahead and bolt up the transmission of the motor first and then do the long tubes after that. And then the K-member. That would probably be the best order to do this in. I didn't have to mess with the driver's side headers. That was fine. As you can see, there is a little protrusion down here that kind of gets in the way a little bit, but nothing like on the other side where the starter is. That's really the problem, and it just doesn't want to clear those headers. I'm thinking now, since the headers are loosened, this may be the opportunity to put the starter in. As you can see, it's kind of buried down in here, but it does give me a little more wiggle room. So I think I'll just take advantage of having these headers unbolted, and we'll just go ahead and install the starter right now. Well, life would have been much simpler had I done this in the right order. So again, learn from my mistakes. Really the best order to do this in is get the motor and transmission together first, then put the starter on, and then get the headers on, and then bolt up the K-member. So I kind of did things in the wrong order, made it difficult. So anyway, I'm gonna get the starter in now because it's easy, and I got the header somewhat unbolted here, so I have a little bit more room to wiggle things around. So anyway, let's just get this in and we won't have to worry about it. Well, starter's back in, so now we can go ahead and bolt up the headers once again. Now the next thing to do is get the intake on, and the fuel injectors, fuel rail, the wiring harnesses, all that. And then I think we're ready to shove it into the car and lower the car down onto it. So let's get this finished up. All right, with the crane free of the motor here, we can start working on the intake. Now we just have to be very careful that we don't drop anything into the motor. We can go ahead and install the gaskets. Okay, let's just kind of see how things are going to fit together here. These are going to need some O-rings that we already have. I just kind of want to see if everything lines up. And it does. And of course we have the coupler here. So let's go ahead and get our O-rings on and get our spacers in here and bolt this up. Here are the O-rings for the coolant crossover tube. And there's the part number if you're interested. This package actually contains 3 O-rings. Some of these crossover tubes have an O-ring between the 2 pipes rather than a coupler. So we're only going to utilize 2 of these O-rings. Now to ease in getting these pipes down with the O-ring, I got a little bit of soapy water that I'm just going to move around here on the O-ring. And just a little bit in the hole here. And hopefully this will just push right down. There we go, no problem. Easy peasy. Now, I probably should put the coupler on here before I go too much further. All right, I already see one problem. I think that hose is just a little too long because you can tell that those two pipes are not parallel. So I'm gonna cut a little bit off and reinstall. All right, with a little bit of that coupler cut off, we get a much better fit here, as you can see. So let's go ahead and continue. Okay, I just put in these two bolts and set the alternator down on it. And as you can see here, these are not the bolts that are supposed to go in here. So I'm gonna have to use some spacers in between the alternator and the bracketry that holds down this coolant tube. Now here's my injectors that have already been cleaned. Now I'm gonna put new O-rings on the high pressure side of the injector, which is gonna be the top. I'm just gonna leave the low pressure ones alone. So this fuel rail's already been cleaned out. So basically all we need to do now is just put on the new O-rings and insert the injectors. All right, we got the new O-rings on. So let's go ahead and flip this over and insert the injectors. And we'll put a little bit of oil on the O-ring before you insert it, just so it slides in nice and easy and the O-ring doesn't bind up. Okay, with all the injectors in, let's just put a little bit of oil on the other O-ring so it'll slide into the intake easier. Let's just take this over the workbench and put the fuel rails on, then we'll put this back. There we go, easy peasy. All right, back on. Now, just so you know, I think we could have just inserted the injectors into the intake first and then slid the rail in without having to remove the intake, but it's so easy at this point, I thought it was just easier to go that route. Okay, now the coolant crossover tube back in, and the alternator. Okay, back in business. I just routed the IMRC cables over here to these holders. However, we're not going to be using them because they just don't work anymore. In fact, I'm probably going to leave this one disconnected just in case it does try to operate. But these things have been welded closed, or actually welded open. So these aren't going to move, and I don't want to put stress on the system. So I'm going to leave that purposely unhooked. Let's go ahead and torque the bell housing bolts down to spec. I believe they're 35 pound-feet. With the exhaust securely in place now, let's go ahead and bolt up our EGR. Okay, let's go ahead and bolt up our EGR. Then we got a new gasket here, which will go in between the intake and the EGR pipe. Hey guys, I know this video is getting a little long. In an effort to save time, I'm not going to show me bolting down absolutely everything because I did promise to get the motor in the car in this video. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So just to let you know, I went ahead and bolted in the intake completely along with the fuel rails. So those are in. I haven't done the alternator yet because I have to put some spacers right in here, as you can see. So right now I'm putting together some washers here that I'm going to use to fill in that void so I can torque the thing down to spec. Okay, normally the bolt that goes into these two front parts for the intake are a stud, and then that's why we see a space right in here. So I'm going to have to fill that with one of these washers. And one over here too. Now with the alternator back on, I got a huge gap right down in here that I need to fill on both sides. Okay, as you can see, I got them spaced out now. It looks pretty good, however it may not be perfect, and if it's not perfect, I may end up with a squealing belt, and if so, I guess I just adjust it by either adding or subtracting some shims. Okay, intake stuff is completely on. Those get torqued down to 89 inch-pounds. And we got another EGR piece to put onto the front here. It's gonna bolt in right here on that header and then to the front of the motor right here. Okay, we got the front side EGR hooked up. So let's go ahead and attack the wiring harness. All right, after a little bit of testing and finagling with these wires, you can see they really fit only one way. And most of the connectors are different, so it's hard to do them incorrectly. The only ones that are replicated are like the injectors. Everything else is pretty much different. And also we had some vacuum lines here. It took a little bit of finagling too, but I think I got them. So we're getting pretty close here. Now that we got the electrical and vacuum lines, let's go ahead and get the plug wires in. Now, the plug wires aren't too difficult. As you notice here on these coil packs, it does show here which terminals go to what cylinders, like for instance this upper right one here, 2 and 3, and they're both the same. So the ones in the white are going to be for one side, the ones in the dark are going to be for the other. All right, I believe we have all the spark plug wiring done now, so I think we can go ahead and get this motor into the car. With the engine wired up as much as we can do at this point, I got it positioned under the car. I tried to center it up and square it up as much as possible. So hopefully we're about the right height here, and we can just lower the car down onto the motor. Okay, we're about ready to set this car down onto the motor. A couple things I need to do first. That exhaust is hanging low, and I need to get back up where it belongs. So I got a couple new exhaust isolators that I'm going to install. And then also for safety, I got some threaded rods here. And I can show you, I'm going up through the car here. And I'm gonna go down through the K-member here on both sides. And this will do two things for me. Not only will it ensure that everything's lined up so I can go straight up, but I'm really doing this as a safety measure. I've got this cart here maxed out. This is a 500-pound cart, and I think I'm probably pushing around 600-700 pounds with everything that's currently on it. And it's not very stable, it's kind of narrow, and I'm a little concerned that the motor could potentially fall off, especially as I raise this up. So, just as an extra safety measure, I got these threaded rods, and I'll go ahead and raise up the motor. And then I'll just, as I raise it, I'll keep threading on a nut and washer on the K-member. And then if for some reason this cart fails, the motor will be held in with these threaded rods. And I'm only using 2 threaded rods. I'm not gonna use 4 because when I get the motor up here where it belongs, I'll use the other hole to put in the proper bolt. Then we'll bolt in the rear of the transmission. Once that's in, then I'll take the rod out and then put the proper bolt in. So anyway, that's my plan of attack here. Let's hope this works. Exhaust is up there where it belongs, nothing more hanging down. Now, before we lift this motor, I just kind of want to make sure everything's lined up right. So I got the threaded rod suspended from the car, and I'll just check the level here. Make sure that it's leveled this way. It looks like it's going to go down perfectly through the K-member. And let's check it this way. Looks good that way too, so I don't need to shift it left or right or back or forth. We got it perfectly lined up. So let's get the other threaded rod in, and then we'll start lifting the motor, and then put a nut on here, and just kind of slowly work this thing up. All right, we got the other threaded rod in and just hanging there. Looks like it lines up pretty darn good. So let's go ahead and raise this motor. Okay, I got my washers and nuts ready. So let's just slowly raise it. Oh my God, that's a lot of freaking lift. You know what, guys? This is not going up. This cart is maxed out. Oh boy, this is not good. What to do? I guess I can always lower the car, but still I won't have the hydraulic force to move the motor up. What to do? Well, after thinking about my situation here for a bit, I'm going to try something before trying to get a new cart. Hopefully I can make this cart work. And what my plan of attack here is to support the back of the transmission here with those ropes going up to where the cross member mounts. and of course these threaded rods that I have. So what I'm going to do is lower the car down and get these threaded rods bolted in here, and then lift the car back up off the hydraulic cart, and then raise the hydraulic cart, and then it's got some little kickstands that kind of manually lock it in place, so I don't have to worry about the hydraulic system failing. And then I'll set the whole car and motor back down onto it at the higher setting, and we'll see if that can work. Okay guys, let's give this a shot. Let's lower the car down just a bit and start threading the rods on. There we go. Let's keep lowering. Okay, let's put our washer on and our nut, and then see if we can't lift this motor back up with the car, and then we'll raise the cart and set it back down on it. Lower a little more. Let's jack up the rear of the transmission just a little bit, and then let's pull our rope tight. There we are. There. Now, if we let the jack down, it should hold it in place. There we are. Okay, let's see if we can just raise this up and then lock the cart in at a higher position. Whoa. It looks like it's going to work. We should be able to pull the cart out now. Yep. All right, I don't have to go much higher. Just till these click in. There we go. They're in. So, let's go ahead and lower it. Now I don't have to worry about the hydraulics failing. I will take the remainder of the slack out of these threaded rods. Let's get that up. And we'll just keep things safe here. And we'll just keep raising, or actually from now on lowering the car in real small increments until everything kind of fits together. All right, let's pull out the slack in the tail end again. Okay guys, I know this is way overkill, but I want to do this very slowly. I want to make sure nothing hits and nothing gets damaged. So I'm now just cranking it up here by the threaded rod, and it's moving up very slowly, but it's working. Okay, by doing this method, I can go really slow, kind of rock it back and forth, make sure it's not hitting anything on its way up. All right, as I keep cranking this up, parts of the top of the motor are starting to hit the body. So I got to re-tilt the transmission. So I got one of these tilt jacks under here, and I'm just going to tilt this back up to keep everything lined up properly. There, now with the tilt up a little more, this starts to swing again, and it's not hitting anymore. But the top of the motor, it's kind of hard to see up here. Anyway, the top of the motor, you can see starting to hit the body there. So anyway, by tilting this up, it kind of moves it forward and prevents it from hitting. So this is just little by little. Just keep inching everything up a little bit on each side and then on the back. And I just kind of routinely check each side here. I'm looks like about 8.5 inches away from being all the way up. And let's see where we are here on the other side. We are, let's see, about 9 or so there, 9.5. So let's start cranking this side up a little more. Okay, and I do put a vice grip on the bottom here to keep things from, to keep the rod from spinning. And then just go up here with the ratchet and just keep it going. This is actually a very easy way to do it. It's kind of time consuming, but it's very easy and I think very safe. All right, it's not going quite as good as I would like. If you look right up here, you'll see that the steering shaft is hitting the valve cover. And on the other side, let's see, we got, well, it's kind of hard to see from here, but up there is some of the AC lines. It's kind of rubbing against the valve cover as well. So I can kind of shift this back and forth a little bit left to right. Hopefully I'll be able to do it enough to kind of maneuver everything up there. All right, guys, I went ahead and lowered this motor. I had to put the key into the ignition to unlock the steering. But as you can see here, it definitely hits the valve cover. And there is a better way to have it turned. If you have it turned this way, it doesn't protrude as far inward. So I think the solution is, anyway, to lower the passenger side and then bring up the driver's side first to clear that steering column. And then once that's cleared, then go ahead and bring up the passenger side. As you can see, I have the driver's side lowered now. But I think if we just lower that passenger side, we can kind of wiggle it up through there. All right, I lowered the driver's side, or I'm sorry, I lowered the passenger side. Now I'm raising the driver's side, and it looks like now we're gonna have some clearance. This is working great. Look at all that clearance we have now. No problem whatsoever. So just remember that, guys. Lift up the driver's side first, and then the passenger side. All right, guys, I have it about within 4 inches of having that K-member back in here on both sides, and it looks like everything's clear now, including the steering shaft. So you just kind of have to strategically maneuver this back up here. Looks like that's angled a little bit forward. So, but I don't think it's hitting anything from underneath. It looks pretty good. Again, the trick here really is to keep the tail shaft moving up along with the rest of the motor. If you have it angled down, the top of the motor is going to hit the firewall. At this point, we got the transmission cross member loosely bolted in there, so it's being held up at the proper height. And I just went ahead and ran these threaded rods all the way up, so the key member is in place. Now we just need to replace the threaded rods with the proper bolts. Let's get the threaded rods out. Although it was kind of a slow process, it was at least safe and effective on raising this K-member with proper alignment. And I didn't hear any crunchies or anything getting destroyed while moving the engine up. There we go. Let's put the proper bolt in. Put the factory bolt in now. And now let's get the bolts for the rear portion of the K-member. And let's get these rear K-member bolts in. With the K-member back in, we need to torque these bolts to spec. I believe the 4 front ones are 89 pound-feet, and the 4 rear ones are 66 pound-feet. All right, our goal for this video was to get the motor in, and we did exactly that. All right, as you can see, there it is. And so anyway, I'm gonna call it quits for this video. I promised to get the motor in, and we did just exactly that. We still have a lot of things to hook up, so in the next video, we'll continue from here, and hopefully, we'll be able to turn this motor over. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.